So thank you, Vasuta, for being part of this exciting project that we are working on, and really eager to get your perspectives on this topic as well.
Thank you, Kartik, for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, Sudha, the book that we are working on is basically to say, if the leader was once a child. So that's what is the working title that we have for the book. And we believe that a lot of the experiences that we as individuals go through during our early days forms who we are as individuals, and then subsequently that could also translate to how we are as leaders. Uh,
Right.
so wanted to get your views on the topic and specifically any experiences from your childhood that has helped you shape the business leader that you've become now.
Sure. I think, for sure, because, childhood is such a core part of, our foundation and obviously, the people around you at that time play a very key role in building that foundation, right? So I do think that shapes a lot of, our personality, who we are, and more importantly, I think our belief and our value system, right? And
Mm,
so when you step out into the world, that's sort of the starting step, right? Or the stepping stone of a lot of things that get into when you get into the workplace. And then obviously, life experiences in the workplace and so on may teach you differently or say that this works, this doesn't work, and then you
mm,
sort of learn and evolve and unlearn and evolve as well, right? So yeah, so I think for me that has been the case in a couple of cases. I mean, just as a just to give you a quick background, so I grew up in Lucknow. My parents were both professors, so a very strong academic environment at home,
mm,
and I was the only child, and I was also the eldest in a large joint family that I lived in for the first 12 years.
mm,
So the eldest sort of a cousin or the eldest child in the house. And why I mention that, because I think some of those things
mm,
framed a lot of who I was as a kid and who I also grew up to be as an adult and even as a leader in the corporate world, right? So I think one part around being the eldest in a large
mm,
extended family, and I saw that on my parents' side as well, because they were also the eldest in their families, was
mm,
a deep sense of responsibility, right,
yeah,
about everything and sometimes even everyone around you,
mm,
right? And sort of taking accountability and responsibility, not just for your own actions, but, of the younger cousins or, even some of the environment around you, because you were eldest, you were held more accountable, right?
yeah,
And I think that sort of, seeped in a sense of responsibility, high sense of, you can say accountability seeped into me at a very young age. And that was something that was also, you can say, encouraged and even, appreciated, right?
mm,
And I think that sort of followed into my adult life when, I even went to college in like a friends group, I would be, termed the most responsible or, for everybody, right?
yeah,
Not just for myself and my actions. And that flew up, that sort of came into the workplace and it was always one of the strengths that was outlined for me was a very high sense of ownership and responsibility as a key strength even in my early days of starting work and so on. So I think that carried through from the environment and the setup of
mm,
being the eldest and deemed most responsible in an extended family, which came in. And while I think having that sense of responsibility and accountability is very good in a corporate environment, because it really helped me in the early days to prove myself, to be seen as someone who's reliable in the team, who can be counted on, who will deliver what they're saying. I think when I also started managing large teams, one of the downsides of that sometimes was that then people would sometimes take that for granted, right? Even
yeah,
people in the team who were, let's say, working, reporting into me, and sometimes would, sort of take that for granted that I would still be the most responsible or accountable person in the team. And they could, sort of fall back. There was always a fallback for them, right? And that's something I realized, slightly in the, middle of my career, right? When I was not just an
yeah,
individual contributor and had a larger team, that's not always a good thing. If you want other people to, learn, and if you want other people to step up and take responsibility, and if you don't want to become the bottleneck for everything,
mm,
right? So that passing that baton is something that I then learned in the corporate setup when I, reached, more sort of in the middle of my career when I was managing, larger teams. So it played a great role, that sense of responsibility, accountability, ownership in the early stages, and, helped me get, you can say to a certain place, but then I had to unlearn some of it and then, see, I mean, that it's not always a good thing. You also need to be able
Ah,
to transfer that to people in the team. So somewhere, I think that still continues as a theme even today. But at least I've learned, when it is a good thing and when you need to, pass the baton to others.
that's this particular aspect is so interesting because each of the people that we have spoken to has had such a different experience on how something similar has had a positive effect for somebody and a negative effect for someone else.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah,
very interesting. Now, in your current corporate journey also, right? So, and we know we have had these conversations also on how the women representation in the CXO level diminishes as we progress. So,
right.
any limiting beliefs that you carried forward from your childhood days? While you said that you being the eldest, the more responsible one, things like that. Were there any limiting beliefs that you carried along the way, and how did that shape you, and how did you try to break that to become the leader that you've become today?
I think, if I look at the women aspect or the gender aspect of it, I think in that respect, Karthik, I was quite fortunate because while, I grew up in, a joint family, which was, so actually we were more of a business oriented family, but, my parents were both also academicians, right?
Okay.
And they were professors. And my mom was a working mother, right? Back in the early 80s. And she had started her career back in, when she was 20. So like back in the
Yeah,
early
60s,
70s, right?
absolutely.
So I think that played a very important role from the start in, not making any of at least my childhood decisions or beliefs about gender, right? Because I think from the start, my parents, like, almost treated me as a gender neutral like
Mm,
child, right? There was never this thing that you should do this or should not do this because you're a girl, right? So in that respect, I think I got a lot of, you can say, opportunities, freedom, right, to operate with, no bias on that front, right?
mm,
And I think that again shaped my outlook in a positive way because in like, the 17, 18 years that I was at home, I never really went in thinking I should not do this because
mm,
I'm a woman, right? I went in because, I should do this because let's say I like doing it or, because I'm good at it, right? With that notion, right?
mm,
Because my parents approached every decision with that notion. Okay, you want to do engineering, you want to do medicine. What do you like? Right? It was
mm,
never saying,
mm.
okay, you should do,
Yeah.
medicine because you're a woman, right? Or, like there was a time when, a lot, like my parents could have thought that I'll also go in the academic way because, they were
Mm,
both
mm.
professors and teaching. And at that time, like, generally people thought, teaching is a good,
Good.
you can say, profession for women because it has a more balanced,
Yeah.
maybe lifestyle and so on. And while, there was mentions of it was never to say that, you should do it, right?
Mm,
Or you should go along that path. So I don't think I ever felt, a forcing function on anything, just because of my gender. And that I think played a big role in actually the belief system that I went into, when I went into college. I never really looked at something as saying, okay, I can do this or I should not do this because I'm a woman, right?
mm,
And I think a
mm.
lot of times when you approach things in a gender neutral way, others reciprocate in that way. I'm not saying it's always the case, but your own outlook and beliefs influence others.
Mm,
And so, yeah, so that's where I graduated from college and, my first job was like in Bangalore. And my parents could have easily said, like some of my friends and colleagues, their parents said that, no, we don't want you to go too far to work,
mm,
right? But my parents were like, okay, choose what you think is best for you, and we will back you, right? And so I was able to make that decision that, okay, I'm going to go to Bangalore, right, for my first job. And they were okay with that, right? Similarly, in, wanting to go for higher studies or, the profession I chose after that, most of those conversations and decisions were about what you want to do and what you're
mm.
good at, and never about you should or should not do this because you're a woman. right?
Okay.
And again, I think I was fortunate to find that even for a lot of women, some of that also steeps in when, post marriage, because, there's an in-laws which comes into the picture and so on.
Mm.
But I think I found a lot of, support even there, right?
Mm.
And because I was also very clear that, I want to do this. And I think by that time, once you're, in your late 20s and early 30s, you have already formed a worldview, right? And
Yeah.
my worldview at that time was fairly gender neutral by then
Gender.
already. So even if someone had tried, I would not have accepted that I should or should not do something because of gender. Not
Uh,
that anyone tried, but you've already shaped your beliefs in that way, right? And once you've shaped your beliefs with a certain foundation, it becomes hard to change them for the positive or the negative at
yeah.
times, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in that sense, the early, years played a big role, and that continued to form my belief. And so, I never looked at any situation as thinking, even while I, grew here in my last 10, 12 years, thinking I can't do this, or, I have a setback in some way because I'm a woman.
Mm. Interesting. But like you said, in 20s or 30s, you've already made that worldview, and it's very difficult to kind of change it at that point.
Change that
And in
worldview.
your case, the worldview was it's a general neutral world.
World.
But obviously, in the team members that you saw around,
Yeah,
they would have come from different experiences. They've carried on, their
absolutely.
worlds are different. And when you came across, probably a conflicting world, how did you kind of
Yeah,
handle that?
and I've had a lot of those conversations, right, with either women colleagues or peers or team members who've come and said that, "Oh, I need to, quit or relocate because I'm getting married, right? Or
Uh,
I'm not sure if I'm going to come back to work after a maternity. I don't know
yeah,
what, my spouse will say or my in-laws will say." And my advice, or at least, guidance to them has been that you should make a choice if you want to do it, because unless you're clear about it, you will not be able to
mm,
convince others about it, right? So
true.
first, are you sure that you want to come back or not, or you want to
Mm,
relocate or not? And then if that is important enough to you, right, then only you can go and convince others or make a decision in
mm,
that way, right?
mm.
And that is when you realize that a lot of people's own belief about whether they want to do something strongly enough or not gets questioned, right?
Ah,
Whether they even want to or not, because only when you feel strongly enough about something, you will come back,
correct.
and do it, and you will move the pieces or move the people around you in that way, or ask for support in that way even,
True.
right?
True.
Because I mean, it is not easy for working women, right? If you have
Yes.
two worlds, you have, lots of responsibilities. So if you're sure you want to do this, it's not going to be an easy journey. So you need to
Yeah.
then, sign up for, asking for support, asking for help on all fronts. And you can do all that only when you are convinced that,
Correct.
why am I doing this? And
Correct.
is this important enough to?
Correct. So one other important aspect for a leader is trust, right? The trust that you have in your team, similarly, how the team has a trust in you. And trusting someone again has a lot of bearing from, how our childhood has been as well, right? The experiences and all that we would have encountered for that trust to be rooted. So have you had any childhood relationships that have actually helped you to build and maintain, that trust factor? So you had that trust built with them, and similarly, those have acted as a role model for you to build trust with your team members as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think trust is a key part of, I think, leadership, because I think if people trust you as a leader, then that's where, they can, either look up to you or respect you, or even, believe what you are saying, right? I think trust is an absolutely critical part of that relationship. And I think, again, for me, I've been always like, even as a kid, right? I was always, more of an introvert and, you can say shy in the early days of my childhood. And for me, so my trust circle was a core inner circle, which was my parents, right? And
Mm,
it was a very, you can say, very strong trust-based relationship that we had. And it was not just theirs with me, right? But even between each other. And I
mm,
always, saw that between us. And I think in that sense, they were role models for me, right? Because they
mm,
would do what they said, right? They would even in the extended family relationships, right? There was a lot of trust people placed in them because they were
Mm.
also elder. They took a lot of responsibility for the family, etc. So that really played a role for me to see that level of trust, between the family and how, they shouldered those responsibilities. So, in the early years, that played a big role for me. Right. And then I think by the time I was, more in like middle school, getting, more to high school, I think then again, my trust-based relationships were more with a very close-knit circle of friends, right? Because
Mm.
by then I had broken out a little bit of my, being very introvert, and I had got
Mm.
into, the phase of being more social. And again, at that time, like, for me, trust was that, because it was always that it is with a few people, but if it's there, then you trust them like completely, right?
Mm.
And I think those relationships never sort of let me down in any
Mm.
way, right? And again, that formed a big part of, you can say, my belief as I, went to college and then came into the corporate world, is to approach anything or anyone with first, you first trust, right? And then if someone gives you a reason to not trust is when step back, right? I know sometimes there's an opposite approach, and I've seen people do that, say, with me sometimes, right? Where you go into something with more skepticism or
Yeah.
reservation, and then first you have to prove yourself and then the person will trust, right?
Correct.
But I've always operated in the first way, that unless someone really gives me a reason to not trust them, then I will sort of retreat, and then I really don't trust, right? And then it
Mm.
becomes very hard for me to trust the second or the third time. But the
Mm.
first time I go into anything new, with at least a handshake of trust. So
Mm.
that's, you can say, maybe the difference, right? Because I did see very strong trust-based relationships in my, immediate family and friend circles in the early years.
Okay. And I think leadership styles also evolve as we become more experienced in the corporate world. And, there are different things that we learn as well, right? So while the actual childhood and the personal growth standpoint is one part, once you have got into a corporate world as a fresher, and then you grow, again, you're a child, once again, from the corporate world standpoint. And then you pick up a lot of things there and you evolve. So how do you see that playing around? There are certain belief systems that you have carried in, which are deep rooted, and then there are certain learnings which have come from the corporate learnings, and some of them could actually be conflicting. But you
Yeah.
need to evolve if you have to reach the top and be the leader that everybody respects. So how can leaders balance that?
Yeah. I think one of the things, maybe two things for me, right, which you can say I unlearned and then learned in the corporate, system over time, is I think I was always someone who was, very quiet, and I would not always speak my mind or,
Mm.
ask the tough questions. And that was a function of, how, I was in school and college and so on.
Mm.
I was more
Mm.
always a listener, observe, process, and then, come back, right?
Mm. Mm.
And that worked okay in school and college and so on. But as I got into more of consulting and even the startup ecosystem, and then in some of the more mid-level roles, I realized that is not enough. Like, while
Mm.
people will value your work, you need
Mm.
to have a voice, right?
Mm.
Because there is not always time for processing and coming back.
Mm. Mm.
A lot of times decisions get made in a discussion or meeting,
Yeah.
and if you don't have a voice, then you're going to get left behind, right? And if you don't make your voice heard or presence felt at the right time, you're going to not be able to influence the things or decisions, right?
Mm.
So that's something I learned in the corporate environment, right, in the early years, that just staying quiet and doing your work and was not going to be enough, right, if you wanted to rise up the ladder. And I think that's something which I push and encourage some of my teams as well, right? That while it
Mm.
is great that you're doing good work, right, you still need to have a voice. I'm not a proponent of saying, you blow your own trumpet, or, keep just talking about things without actual substance. But
Yeah.
if you have substance, if you have a point of view, if you have a, genuine question, speak up. Right.
Yeah.
And that's something I learned. And, I try to now encourage all of my, teams to really do. Right. So that was a big shift for me from my, you can say, childhood and early days to the last almost now 7, 8 years, right, which I
Mm.
learned in the corporate ecosystem. I think the other was around hard work, right? And I think this, like my dad used to quote from the Gita that, this hal ki ichha kiye bina karm kiye ja, right? Which
Yeah.
is, keep working without worrying about the award or the reward of something.
Yes.
And again, while that was good, right, from the point of view of instilling the sense of hard work and, not worrying always about the goal or outcome. I think again, corporate environment has taught me that, you have to be, you know, there is always outcomes, there is
Yes.
always consequences, right? It is not an ideal world, and you have to think about outcomes and, time bound decisions. Ultimately, you are, running, business, right? And so again, that's something that, I've learned over the years, that you can't just work hard, right? You have to keep doing a check-in, keep reevaluating your decisions, shift course if needed. You can't blindly just go and say, okay, I'm working hard and that's enough, right? Without worrying about the reward, right?
Mhm.
It's not an ideal world in that
Right.
sense.
That's very
Yeah.
rightly said. Very rightly said. So my last question, Vasudha, is for all the emerging leaders out there who, either are aware of how their childhood has influenced them or is influencing them, or are not aware and just operating subconsciously with those. What would be your advice for them if they have to really be successful as leaders in the long run?
See, I would say that, you should trust your instinct, play to your strength. So if there are certain things which have been foundational in your childhood and early years, play to that strength, because that can, define who you are, that can, differentiate you from others, because that's something you have innate, and that's been, sort of, that's how you've been brought up, right? Whether it's a sense of ownership or responsibility or a sense of hard work, whatever that may be, right? Play
Mhm.
to that strength, make that the anchor of, maybe of who you are as a person, but also be ready to unlearn and
Yeah.
adapt, right? As you get into different settings, whether it's a startup or a large corporate or your own something, right? Be
Mhm.
ready to adapt and relearn, right?
Mhm.
Because I think if it's good to play to your strengths, but then, that can also, if you don't keep reevaluating and learning and
Yes.
adapting, then you can also become obsolete very quickly. So
True.
play to your strength, but unlearn and
Adapt. So thank you, Vasudha, for being so candid, sharing your experiences and how it shaped you up as a successful leader. Really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you once again for your time.
thank you so much, Karthik. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.